Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, February 1st, first day of February. Where January go? We are going to start our discussion now today. I think Laura Trishman from going to go over some of the items that she has in the capital budget regarding state and historic preservation requests. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
You are ready to go first, right? Correct? I had you first on. Okay.
Yes. For the record, I am Laura Trishman. I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer. Thank you for having me. Today joining me is Jamie Duggan, who's our Director of Preservation for the State Historic Sites, and also our Deputy Commissioner, Alex Farrell. I'm going to do these in order as they appear in the capital bill for you.
Yep.
Our ACCD is section 4. So this is starting with section 4, line 52, which is the unmarked burial fund. This was established in 2001, the result of finding unmarked burials. Over the years, it has also been used to protect, preserve sites, move grave goods, as well as human remains, do archaeological assessments and research. The initial allocation in 2001 was $100,000, and we spent that down with projects over and over. Quite often it is federal projects such as VTrans. In Burlington, they found the remains of 20 soldiers from the War of 1812 when they were doing an improvement project. Then COVID hit, and we were asked if there was any funding in the capital bill that we could return back for other purposes. And we had not used the remaining, I think it was down to $46,000. And I said, absolutely, COVID's important. You need to help out. And what are the chances? 3 months later, the chances were real. Again, in Burlington, they found the remains of, they found 17 graves in the back of a residential property in the Old North End. Somebody was putting an addition on their house to make it into 2 units. And the construction foreman, as he was digging for the foundation, spotted a skull. And the process is that the medical examiner is called, the state police are called, the state archaeologist is called, and then the state historic preservation officer is called. This was the height of COVID, and I don't live too far. So we were over there very quickly, and we know in this particular instance that these again were War of 1812 soldiers because of the in-depth study that's been done. This is the defined boundary for their burial sites. And we found buttons and items related to their time in service. And this is just one example of finding these things. And so for this particular instance, we ended up only slowing down the housing construction by 10 days. We got archaeologists in there immediately. They removed the remains. They took them back. It was UVM Consulting Archaeology. They took them back. They studied them, documented them. In the meantime, we used money from our archaeology Heritage Center fund to cover the expense. It cost us $70,000 to exhume them, document them, and then work with the city of Burlington, which was, I must say, a tremendous asset and partner, because over in Lakeview Cemetery, just as you enter the property, they paid for this Columbine. As you can see from the bottom picture, when it's open, they're actually putting in boxes of the remains. So each soldier is in their own box with their own grave goods. This allows us to get back in should we ever have funding or a ancestor, a descendant want to do some testing, or we have room for 7 more because we are going to fund them. So this funding really matters. And as I said, we didn't have any funding at the time. This happened in September of 2020. So we had to borrow money from another one of our capital bill projects and then pay it back. So we got money back, that's $56,000. We've now got a balance of $52,000. So the recommendation is 25 this year and 25 the next year, which will keep us whole. And that money by statute should be staying put.
What's the, out of all the work that, the good work that you folks have done with this, what's the, I'm gonna leave it to you, the most surprising or rewarding find that you found as far as an old gravesite or something of a historic nature that really kind of touched with what, something maybe that was important to you? I mean, not that at all isn't, but.
Sure. Well, I would say there's 2 things. Unmarked burials are up in Highgate, Swanton on Monument Road, and the state actually owns most of that property. We have worked with the Abenaki and the Preservation Trust to have grave goods reburied during ceremonies. It's totally unmarked so that people don't know to be digging, but the Abenaki still have ceremonies up there, and it was just this past year designated Vermont's first archaeological landmark. So that property really matters. You might remember that where we had ice dams undermining the site, and so we had to get some money to take down the trees and build riprap further along to protect the embankment so that those graves weren't falling into the river. I think that one really, really matters, particularly since it is an active worship place for the Abenaki. They're very sensitive about it. The other would be, because the soldiers from the War of 1812 who were discovered in 2001 had just been sitting in boxes on a shelf at UVM, getting to the point where we were able to reinter them with military honors this past June. And that was all underway before we even found the additional soldiers in September of 2020. So we had already ordered the column and the headstone. And there were about 150 people at this ceremony, full military honors. So
That's very nice.
I think that matters a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. The Abenaki, did they, where this burial site is, was it a burial site of multiple graves? I mean, did the Abenaki actually have sites to where they were actually the burial grounds of?
Yes, it's part of the Missisquoi village. And then there's also a Jesuit burial ground up there.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
very, very neat. Oh, good. Yes.
When you evacuate someone that's been buried for 100 years, is there any remains or anything left, or?
So as you can see, there's actually the full skeleton remains.
Really?
Yes. And
Were they buried in something back then, or?
they were buried in wooden
With
boxes,
boxes?
which have since deteriorated, completely disintegrated. We think they very well could have had wooden headstones. Those traditionally are gone 5-10 years. And
But the skeleton is still there. Can they do a DNA on that?
we did not do DNA, but we did testing of their bones
Okay.
density, so we know what part of the country that they came from. So we know from
100 years old. Oh,
as far as South Carolina up to Maine.
wow. That's amazing. They could detect something that been buried. Well, how long have you been buried for?
Well, it's 1812 or thereabouts.
A couple hundred years.
Yeah. Yeah. And the hospital that was in Burlington has great records. So we have a full inventory of everyone that was buried there. We just don't know who's who.
Wow.
And there's nothing in the graves that we have found so far that's able to identify, oh, this is Petty Officer so-and-so. We do know that they We have found only Americans. We have found metal buttons and
I
things
was
like
gonna say
that.
the metal buttons must stay,
Mhm.
so other than the skeleton, any other remainder, any other articles you were wearing at the time?
Buckles,
Yeah,
things like that, yes.
Wow.
One of the gentlemen in Burlington from September was an amputee. And then there were 10 graves that were empty. And we know from newspaper accounts that the medical college knew about the cemetery and would come over and dig up some cadavers for
oh, all that,
study.
so they didn't just disappear there, someone took them out. Wow.
Yes, but the grave shafts are all still there. And we only exhumed what was within the footprint of the addition. We know there are more beyond in the rest of the yard and all the other yards. And Burlington CEDO office has set up a permitting process that if you're applying to build something or excavate in that part of the city, you will be warned that there's a possibility you might find something. It doesn't go into great detail because we don't want people ignoring it or digging for it.
Right.
Interesting. And
Well,
so, I'm
no,
sorry,
no,
is
go
there
ahead.
funding to help those people do that process, do the archaeological?
That's
I
what,
mean, because that's what,
That's
a
what
lot of
this-
times is a barrier. So the state funding could be used for
yes,
that.
we stepped in so that the property owner didn't have to pay anything.
That's great.
And we worked really, really fast so that we only delayed the project 10 days.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I'm thankful
Actually,
that-
these can take months.
Yeah.
for it. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that there was a good turnout and when they returned them, it was very nice.
Will that skeleton ever disappear after like 300 years or something, or it always remains over there?
I think it'll always remain, particularly since it's in a special archival box now. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, Egyptian skeletons
Mhm.
are around. Yeah,
Wow.
just depends on how it's.
I think it's the acidity of the
What's
soil.
around it.
Yeah, well, it's the
Yeah.
acidity of the soil.
It is.
What might have you.
It's
Yeah.
hard to believe.
Well, very nice. That's,
Wow.
yep, money well spent.
And then line 53, the roadside historic site markers. I love and get so frustrated by this program. I freely admit it. People love this program. It was established in 1947. We've been using the same foundry since 1947. It's located in Ohio. They're really great partners. They do most of the state historic site markers throughout the country. We have a criteria system now. So we have turned down a small handful of markers that didn't meet that criteria. But basically we're trying to commemorate and honor. And we have developed through this program heritage trails, the African American Heritage Trail, Women's Trail, which is also working with the Women's Suffrage Association in Washington, DC. We have a number of LGBTQ markers now. African American, I said that, Native American. Also during COVID, there was a bit of a slowdown, so we were able to look at markers to make sure they had appropriate wording, text. There were some markers we removed. We also have to deal with markers that are aging out because there are some from the 50s. So on average, each year we are repainting or replacing 10 markers. We are creating 10 to 12 markers a year. And just last year, the prices went up. But BGS worked with us very quickly to approve the funding increase. So this is a recommend at level funding of 25,000 because Jamie and I plus one other admin person are the staff for this. I'm sitting on easily 20 applications.
What determines whether a marker goes up? What has to happen?
So the application comes in, it's usually including detailed or at least citations where I can follow up on the research. They recommend a site that we vet with VTrans and the town garage and also DigSafe. And they will present their text, which we vet and edit, and there's a little back and forth. Then they're presented to the Vermont Advisory Council on Historic Preservation for final approval. If they're put in the state right-of-way, V-Trans installs them. If they're in the town right-of-way, then we work with the town garage.
In 1947, what was the first one that was issued?
I knew this, like, John Smith.
Good morning, Beth.
Yes,
Good question.
Yeah,
Yes.
in Wolcott?
yes.
Yeah, I know where it's at.
Yes, and there's, the real old ones are like really wide.
Right.
Then there's the little ones, which you have out here in front of the State House. Now we're somewhere in between.
Got
A marker costs about $2,300. It will have either the same text on the other side, or it continues the story, or it picks up another topic that's related to that site. We provide the poles, which are breakable poles, so if a car or a truck hits it, it will just break and the marker will fall down. Usually the seal is the part that falls off the most.
Are they all still up?
We have a couple that are at the foundry right now. We have a couple that we removed because they were not appropriate, very small number, and we're replacing those with better text. 10 years ago, we had 214. Just 2 weeks ago, I labeled our 308.
Sure.
And of course, because we're in this room, I had to mention we have one in Virginia, thanks to Senator Benn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember, I was gonna have you,
Big supporter of that.
Yes.
In fact, he visited the site, he was there, he used to go
He
motorcycle.
broke it down.
Oh, no,
he fought in the battle, didn't he?
Yeah. He was a big supporter, let me tell you. He knew that backwards and
Oh, he did. He did a nice job with that.
Oh, he did.
I think he even helped, to identify the site.
Oh, no,
Yes. And he drove it down and he helped put it up. And
Yeah.
I regularly get people from Vermont visiting and sending me pictures. So that way we're really able to monitor its condition.
He was an expert in that. He could speak for an hour on that subject or whatever.
So that's Civil War related or what?
Yes,
Yeah, it was, yeah.
How does weather affect them?
that's an excellent question because we have had some of them facing the wrong way where they're getting abused by the wind. The paint usually comes off. 2018, the foundry changed their paint recipe and we had to send all of those back. They were under warranty and have them all repainted. There's the Long Trail one that is just off of, I can see it on at the rest area of 89. That one has been shot, so it had bullet holes in it. They fixed that. It actually is standing so that it gets a lot of snow on it, but it's easier to read. So we do monitor those that are in a position like that.
Okay.
We had a small one that was stolen and ended up in New Jersey, and a neighbor called the state police. And so then we got a call. It was in the Newark lockup. And one of my staff was visiting her family and drove back to Vermont, picked it up at the prison, brought it back, we had it repainted and reinstalled.
Nice.
That's great.
Wow. Meant to be.
Here's a bigger picture of that.
Yeah.
Oh, there, yeah, okay. So I'm trying to figure out what committee that might, or maybe they were just there.
Yeah. Geisha was-
Because it's in Windsor, probably. That's
Geisha
Oh,
was-
that's no committee, that's just running for office.
Yeah.
I was just concerned.
Yeah,
coincidence.
other than being here, I don't think I've seen so many legislators in the same place right now. Yeah,
That's, I was gonna say that, that's why she was there.
there were more, but they actually left before the picture, so. But this is an African-American slave marker down in Windsor that was installed. I spend most Saturdays during the warm months going around the state for the dedications.
Yeah, it's a great program. I mean, the tourists love it
Yes,
and locals love it. Have you considered a Vermont or foundry? Does it have to be
there isn't one.
okay?
Yeah, I did,
Just because
Yeah.
the shipping costs.
it's
must
part
be
of,
huge.
it's part of the 2,300 that we pay for each marker.
Yeah.
They include that in there. We do get the poles here.
Correct.
And then I want to add that it's $900 to have one repainted.
Okay.
But most states use the same foundry, so we've been, it's taking like 24 months right now to get,
Wow.
no, weeks,
That's a
sorry,
long
weeks,
time.
weeks.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, weeks, it's a very long time. That's because New York sent an order for 200 markers
Oh.
to the same foundry and kind of shut them down, so, we're getting back up to speed. We're gonna be installing one for, Burton Boards in London.
That's a nice idea.
Yeah, we're very excited about that.
Nice.
Nice.
Line 54 is the Vermont Underwater Historic Preserves. We are not proposing to sink anything.
We spent a lot of time on the new senators. We spent a lot of time on that last year. We were gonna sink a ferry and it didn't work out that way. So anyways, that's the comment about we weren't gonna sink anything.
Okay,
So
thank you.
But as a result of that, we did get additional funding and we're going to be opening up 2 new preserves. So right now we have 9 preserves on the Vermont side that we take care of and 1 preserve that is on the New York side that now New York pays for. We have a partnership going back to 1982 with the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. They install the buoys and all of the lines. They do all of the documentation. They keep things safe. We work on the permits with the Coast Guard. They foster awareness with us to make sure that people know where these are. With improving technology, sonar, people can find these wrecks and dive on them. So it's very important that we make people aware of where they are and how to safely dive on them. Last year, there were over 3,000 visits to the preserves. They have to register, and then we also know from our partners at the Burlington dive shops how many people were coming in. And it's year-round diving. They can do it through the ice. It's actually much clearer. It's cold, but it's much clearer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta go back to the same hole. I've
Oh
always
my
thought about
gosh.
that. What a feeling that's gonna be.
It's like cave dive.
Oh, no, I
Yeah.
would.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Potash Point Canal Boat and Canton is going to be opening in May at the same time as the other markers. And then the Providence Island Canal Slough in Colchester Causeway will be opening a little bit later this summer. The cost to the preserves is not just the documenting that you can see through the sonar imaging or the drawings, or now they do a 3D or on the website, you can move it around and you can see underneath it and inside of it, but it's also for the buoys. There's underwater signage, there's GPS, there's working with the Coast Guard, and there's definitely educating the public. Because people can dive these themselves. So for example, at the same time we found the War of 1812 soldiers, we also discovered the paddle wheels for the steamboat Phoenix, which caught on fire the early part of the 19th century. And we thought that because they were wooden, they had just burned up. And instead they fell off. And then the ship went further down into Colchester Shoals. But the paddle wheels are way too deep to safely dive. So we want to make sure that people know they're there. We document them to provide them the information, but that they do not dive them because they're not safe.
Our phone's still involved, doesn't it?
A little bit, but not very much. Susan McClure is really doing an excellent job.
Years here.
Yeah,
Was very, very involved in this over the years.
how many sites have you identified?
there are over 300 in the lake, and on the Vermont side, we know of at least 100 that we take care of.
Yeah.
So I didn't need to add one last year.
Yeah, enough, yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, I guess,
yeah.
just a little bit, just
Yeah,
on the
please.
Connecticut River, there's petroglyphs that are underwater, but I don't think they would rise to the level of
They-
this, but.
They don't rise to to the underwater preserves, because that's just for Lake Champlain. What they do fall to our state archaeologists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
They're pretty cool. And they're
5,000 year, I mean,
Yes.
right?
There's an underrepresented communities grant from the National Park Service, the first Vermont's ever gotten, that is now underway to document them.
Cool.
What's next?
Line 56 is the Historic Sites Maintenance Fund. This used to be called the Major Maintenance, but now it is just Maintenance Fund. The first property that the state of Vermont owned was the Chester A. Arthur Boyhood Home site up in Fairfield, and that was in 1902. We did not start a historic sites program until 1947. By that time, we had Hubbardton and a couple other sites. The recommendation is $500,000 for both years. I wanted to show you the list of our major sites that we do have open, how many buildings. We can go from one building to, in Plymouth, we have 29. Not all of them are open to the public. We still have to maintain them. We have over 900 acres. And you can see the date of these sites go from Native American right up until 1969. So we've got a very wide selection of buildings, structures, sites that we need to take care of. These sites are all open to the public. A couple of them are unlimited access. And the ones that draw in the most visitors are Bennington Battle Monument and the President Calvin Coolidge State Historic Site. So I wanted to hand this over to Jamie, who's our Director of Preservation, and he can go into some of the details. But what we've really been working hard on is to be less reactive, less emergencies, and be proactive with conditions assessments, maintenance studies, so that we know exactly, like BGS has been doing for state buildings, planning things out 10, 20 years. We're not making guesstimates on how much money we need or the product that we need to have, the work that needs to be done. Our estimates are going to be based on current future conditions assessments, actual design plans, and construction costs. And we've been doing a lot of planning in the past few years to get us to where we are now.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Nice.
For the record, my name is Jamie Duggan. I'm the Director of Preservation at the State Historic Sites. And just for some context, we're operating on a very different paradigm than BGS is, for example, where we're not dealing with office buildings that have staff and whatnot. We're dealing with these historic resources that need replacement and upgrade at times. And what we're really focused on is minimizing change at these resources. So our mission is really a process of keeping something of value alive, intact, and free from damage and decay. So that takes maintenance, it takes care, and it takes a little self-guarding as well. We have a selection of projects we were working on this past year, but moving forward, we have a couple of primary projects. The first one I'd like to talk about is the Bennington Battle Monument. And back in January of 2018, I was not yet in this position, but at the division and made aware of a situation at the monument. We had ice lensing on the inside of the walls and collecting on the stairs that go around the inside. And that was problematic, even though folks don't use the stairs anymore. They've been mothballed for a while. But started looking at the history of what's happened at the monument and going back in time. The monument was built in 1891, but by 1910, there was already newspaper reports of it being damp and wet. 1920s, there's reports of the first cracking being visible within the stones and on the monument. So this is a deterioration mechanisms that have been going on for a long time. And it looks back in our records that the monument's really never been given the full attention that it's needed at once. There's been a lot of Band-Aid repairs here and there, work cut short for lack of funding and other issues that have come up. So what we did, and again, the monument is a very unique structure. It's the second tallest unreinforced masonry building in the United States, second to the Washington Monument.
Built that years ago. How would they ever have built that back in what, 18?
Yeah, there's some great pictures. There was a wooden scaffolding that was erected completely as around the monument as it continued to go up.
Scaffolding is
Yeah.
by hand because there's no machinery, nothing. I
There's
just.
block and tackle up top to hoist materials, and there was a great ceremony setting the pyramidion stone at the very top. And you can kind of see it like a small Volkswagen moving over to the top of the monument. It's pretty remarkable.
And who built it, Jamie?
I'm sorry?
Who built it?
Well, it was designed by J. Phil Brand, who is an architect from Boston, and I am forgetting the name of the actual firm, but they were, I believe, from Massachusetts.
But who commissioned it to be built? Who paid for it? Who,
Was it the state?
So originally it was sponsored by the Bennington Monument. There was a private group.
Yeah.
It was promoted by the governor at the time, Hiram Hill, was one of the persons involved with that. It was, a memorial for the monument, but it was also, I think, a statement of the time, and it brought a lot of pride to Bennington and the community as well.
It was paid for by Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, not New York.
New York's upset. They probably wanted it in New York.
The stone is from New York and the battle was in New York.
Right. Well, I suppose the warranties run out on it. Okay. Well, I was hoping maybe there might be
Is
something.
it
hanging in
stone
there.
or brick?
It's stone. It's a Sandy Hill dolomite, which is a dolomite limestone, comes across in the Glens Fall area.
No.
No equipment, no cranes.
No.
You should look at the blow up,
Yeah,
the top of it.
yeah.
Is that a light at the top or a
It is a
stairway?
star. There's a multi-pointed bronze star at the top. There's
Yeah.
also two emergency beacon lights
Okay.
for FAA
Yep.
purposes these days. But yeah, it's 306 4 inches to the top of the star. So moisture does not do well. This building is not doing well with the moisture issues. We're having deterioration in the electrical system. We're having problems with the contacts in the elevator. And so we took we took our time and planned for a project that would be able to fully document and understand what's going on with the monument these days. One of the first things we did was come up with a scope of work to get this information. We had a really wonderful response. We had about 15 different proposals. We had a robust selection committee, about a dozen different folks between BGS and ACCD. And we are working with a great team from Stevens and Associates down in the Brattleboro area and Silman from New York City, who are the structural engineering experts who've dealt with these types of structures before. We commissioned, as part of that, a 3D laser scan of the monument. We did not have any as-built drawings of the monument. There's some historical documents in the Bennington Museum, but they're sort of aesthetic and pretty. They don't have any real information for construction. So we were able to do that and do some baseline documentation. We also did some industrial ropes access. We're doing visual inspections. I'll show you some of that in a moment. And while this is going on, it did not really, we know we have a project to do and we'll have to get to it, but meanwhile, our elevator is really the lifeblood of this site. It's one of the most visited sites, as Laura has mentioned, and we've had instances where it's been closed or we've had to repair it because of some of these issues with the moisture. And that puts a real hit on the entire program because of the loss of revenue and just folks not getting the satisfaction of getting to go up to the top.
When
And
was the elevator put in? What year?
the elevator was put in the 1950s. It was one of the first Otis elevators in the state of Vermont, and that was right after the state acquired it. The Board of Historic Sites put the elevator in, as well as, I believe, 6 different heaters, and because one of the early attempts in the 1950s was to actually heat the monument. So if you can imagine this 300-foot chimney of air, it would be very cost prohibitive these days. That was removed in the 70s with the energy crisis, and we have not gone back to that yet. We're wondering what we should do though, because there is this sort of microclimate that exists within the monument. So even on a warm summer day, the stones are sort of dripping on the inside. We found through our investigations that the monument is saturated and continues to hold water. And so in our northern climate, when we have these freeze thaw cycles, that exerts tremendous pressure on the mortar and on the stones, which is what is attributed to that cracking and some of the mortar loss. So this is some slides here of the laser scan drawings. The resolution with the equipment that was used, I think it was like $100,000 laser scan head on the tripod that they were using. We were able to capture every single stone on the inside and on the outside. And what that also allows us to do is understand its construction a little bit better, on which stones perhaps are through stones, connecting the different wides of masonry and making it more structural. The monument's about 7 feet wide, the walls are at the base, and then it goes up to just 2 feet towards the top, up above the observation level. These drawings were really important though, because what they've allowed us to do then is the engineers working are now able to sort of overlay on top of the drawings the conditions that we have found. And we're also doing some monitoring for the environment with relative humidity and temperature. And so up in the upper right-hand corner, that's showing you some monitoring as far as how is the temperature and humidity affecting cracking in some of the locations that we're monitoring. And these are, again, important to understand how the monument sort of works through the seasons and what's happening. We had a really amazing process here. This was the team from Vertical Access. This is an industrial ropes team that were essentially rappelling down the monument with tablets that had these laser scan drawings loaded onto them. They were able to take photographs. They were able to, write down the conditions that they saw. They did not do a comprehensive of the entire monument, but we did 8 different drops around the monument over that period. And the most important thing was we had a video feed. So what we're seeing in the center here is actually the camera attached to one of the technician's chest, and he's able to then talk and let us see what he's seeing up close, 200 feet in the air. So that was really important for the engineers and the conservators to start to see some of these conditions that previously we could only see with binoculars.
That's great. Yeah, I guess you had to pay the people, because some people, we could have them pay us to do that, right?
Yeah, the Vertical Access team are nationally known. They perform this kind of work all over the country on monuments, state capitals, that type of thing. And really, it was one of the only ways we can capture the information we need to be able to move towards a construction project. One of the ancillary things that was going on is we have purportedly General Burgoyne's kettle that was captured at Saratoga has been hanging in the monument since 1891. And it's not a good condition for a cast iron cook kettle either. So we recently had a project. We hired some fine art riggers and movers that we got a recommendation from the Hood Museum in Dartmouth. And we lowered the kettle from its perch up in the atrium there of the monument, and we brought it to the Williamstown Conservation Art Center. And they will be doing some qualitative analysis to start to try and help us determine, is it actually Burgoyne's kettle or something contemporaneous? And then if so, we'll be doing some more quantitative analysis to figure out exactly what we need to do to conserve it and repair it.
What was it used for? XPA?
Purportedly, it was a camp kettle, so feeding victuals, I believe is the word that I see used in the archives a lot. Victuals to the troops.
It won't go back in the monument.
Good.
We're gonna find a spot for it in the gift shop or
Excellent.
create a little, perhaps type of a standalone place for it to be.
Maybe you can someday, Senator Mazza, go make us lunch out of it. or
Yeah,
something.
right, yeah. For a donation.
Yeah.
Wishing well.
The next project I'd like to tell you a little bit about, unless you have any other questions about Bennington. Okay. Senator Justin Morrill homestead in Stratford. Senator Morrill was a very important politician to the state and the nation, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
He was a successful businessman who retired at 35, and then he became sort of a gentleman architect and landscape designer. He learned all of that through reading, and he had an extensive library. And he was a student of Alexander Jackson Davis and Andrew Jackson Downing, who were two proponents of the Gothic Revival. The Gothic Revival is a return to a more romantic approach to architecture than a lot of classical styles that preceded it. And also a really important relationship between the landscape and the setting of the building. Morrill was very interested in agriculture. He did a lot of experiments, growing different food crops, growing different ornamentals, keeping studious notes, and created this magnificent site that seems to be, again, surrounded by water everywhere. There's about 228 acres of watershed up above this building, which sits on a sloping hillside. Morrill even put his own creative water features in. There's a pond that's dug and it's all the way up at the top of the property. I figured out yesterday it has about 495,000 gallons of water in it, just for reference. And of course, with these great big roofs, there's a lot of water coming off the roof to be collected. This is a site where we're seeing a lot of deterioration in the building itself, and in some places has some effects on some of the artifacts inside. So we've been doing our best to maintain it, but we have a drainage project ahead of us there. We hired Marble Valley Engineering a few years ago. They did a fantastic report for us and a lot of documentation, pre-project documentation. We are ready now to put a project, an RFP out for design and construction management services on this. We have received a Save America's Treasure grant from the National Park Service. We applied for and received that. The overall cost of this project is about $555,000 right now, and 226 is coming from the federal government. We have some other things to do after that, but we're queued up right now to hire a firm, complete the construction drawings by this year, the end of this year, hopefully, and we would love to be starting construction on that early next spring. And after that, once we can get a new baseline level there, then we can go back and figure out how we can do some environmental monitoring and better things with the actual home. In preparation for that, we did some archaeology work this year. We found some really interesting things below ground that showed that Morrill was more of a student architect perhaps than a practicing one, some unique things, but these also, we did ground penetrating radar and some other interesting things that we were then able to go and ground source and truth some of the anomalies that we saw in that scientific stuff with actual in-field archaeology confirmation of some of those pieces. We've also found some interesting things, you know, when you start tearing buildings apart, you never know what you're going to find. And within one of the terrelles of the crenellation of the library, in this top picture, we found actually a smaller version of the original. The house is now this bright pink color to painted to mimic Italian sandstone, but earlier it was more of a taupe sort of sand color. And so just the idea when we opened that you know, that had been covered for 150 years plus, and we're learning more about this building all the time, I guess is really what's happening there. Any questions about Morrill? All right, so the next feature one would be the President Coolidge Homestead in Plymouth. This year we'll be celebrating the centennial of Coolidge taking the oath of office in the living room of his boyhood home, and we'll be seeing tremendous visitation, I'm sure. One of the issues that we've known about for a little while, if you look on the right-hand side here, you see those stairs inside of the woodshed of the home, and those stairs do pose a barrier for accessibility. This route was actually designed in the 1960s when the state acquired this from the Coolidge family, and architect was designed to sort of put that through, and there wasn't the same understanding of accessibility and the need for making these buildings universally accessible. So this is a barrier for us. We planned for this project. We had again a great RFP process. We have full drawings, construction drawings ready to go. We've put this project out to bid 3 times, and we do not have anyone who has submitted any proposals for this. One of the issues is that Plymouth Notch is quite rural from a lot of the work centers, and so just getting contractors up there is a challenge. We've gone back and forth between having small projects and bigger projects, because once you get someone there, well, then it, makes it worth their while, it makes it worth our while. We have not yet found, all the firms that we've relied on for qualified craftspeople, because we do have standards we have to meet with our work. Unfortunately, because of the industry right now, they're building custom homes, and they're booked out for the next few years. So we decided it's in our best interest, because of this hard stop with the events coming up this season, that we would put this project on the shelf and look to do it August 5th of this year. We'll start hopefully putting that out to bid. Meanwhile, though, we do have a lot of folks coming. So we have been working diligently to really continue the maintenance, because preservation really is all about maintenance. So we've been going around and doing repainting, wood repairs. We've done a lot of window repairs. This is the Silly Store, which at the very back of that historic image, you can see the little brown section there is where Coolidge was actually born, in the back of the store. And his family lived here until he was 4, and then they moved across the street. We've done a lot of refurbishment here. And some of the other buildings as well. This is the Wilder House and the Aldrich House, which are 2 other of the many, the dozen or so buildings in the village. And our goal in all of this is if Coolidge were to come back today, would he recognize, the village? And that's really, I think he would. I think he would be proud of what he sees there. Very much is keeping in the spirit of, the period of significance for that site, which we'll be celebrating this year. A lot of these are small projects, and we're able to be somewhat nimble and deal with that. What we've also been doing, though, is we have been looking ahead and planning ahead, which is why the cost spreadsheet that we had looked at a week or so ago, we have a chance now to understand our portfolio a lot better. And so while we do have a lot of work ahead, we're able to pace ourselves, and we try to preserve as much of the historic fabric as possible, and when we can't, we replace it in kind. That's a different type of approach than planning for replacements and planning for other things. We certainly have to do that with our infrastructure, with our heating and ventilating systems, and that ends up being something that we do more of that than actually replacing rotten clapboards or painting things, because that's a little bit easier for us to do as part of our regular maintenance.
Now, on a national level, there's not a fund of any sort to say, and I'm not trying to point you guys in the right direction, just for my own knowledge and committee's knowledge. I'm sure you chase down every available fund source that you could, but there's not a national level preservation fund to help keep and restore presidential homes.
There is not, that I'm aware of. And one of the interesting notes here is Coolidge was the last president that didn't have a library. So a lot of presidents after Coolidge have these nonprofit centers that can take donations and can do other things that might help with historic resources associated with that president. But we're sort of the end of the line for Coolidge, and we actually hold most of those gifts of state and other things in our safe deposit box. So we're sort of that receptacle here. There isn't a program that would focus on that nationally. We are working with the National Park Service. For example, we have a great partnership with the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. And we've been looking at the landscape here. We're hoping to do part of this larger project included amending the pathways to be more universally accessible and providing better pathways for people throughout all of our buildings. It's a rural village, and so it's hard to kind of have, it can be a challenge to have the pathways and other landscape features, meeting code and meeting ADA. But we're working towards making that compliant to the best we can.
Have we ever had any funding made available to you from our federal delegation? Like current senators now, Welch and Sanders and Ballot. I mean, have we ever received any type of funding in that sort?
Senator Leahy was instrumental in creating the semi-quincentennial grant through the Park Service, the Department of Interior. We have applied for $410,000 for Old Constitution House, which we hope to hear positive in May. That is unmatched money. Then we also plan to apply for $700,000 for Bennington Monument from that same fund.
Yep.
And as Jamie mentioned, we've been getting matching grants through the National Park Service as well with the Save America's Treasures.
Yeah.
The Coolidge site did receive a Save America's Treasure grant, I believe, about 10 years ago.
No, it was more than
More than
that.
that?
Yeah, it's about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was when they built the underwater tanks for the fire hydrants and all. So yes and no.
Right.
Like, there's never been a specific earmark for Bennington. I know Senator Leahy tried very hard for Bennington. But for these sites, we've not gotten any.
Well, we're going to have some of those folks in, and certainly with the needs that you've asked. I mean, we listen, everybody that comes in here. I mean, as you can understand, everybody's got an ask and everybody's got a want. And, I think that to hear the amounts of monies that you might be needing to restore some of these, and it's not that they're not deserving, it's just, there's just tremendous amounts of money. But I will bring that up when we meet with our federal delegation. We're working on that right now to get them in here. And I think that the committee will remind me to bring that up when we do that, to see if we can't find some monies in the historic somewhere in this nation, some monies to see what we can to shed some light on some funding for you. So
That's all I have. If you have any other questions.
I think we're good. Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
we appreciate it very much. Very, very interesting stuff. Appreciate what you folks do very much.
See the picture of Coolidge?
Yeah.
So we've got one more.
Yeah, in the road. Yeah, I wonder what year that was.
Oh, I like his hat.
Yeah, I do too.
Looks like what the state police wore later. Yeah.
Based on the addition that's on the side of the house.
After he was out of office.
So he was out of office.
Yes.
Okay.
In the early 30s.
Yeah. And he retired back to that property.
Yes.
Can I ask a question about how the two of you tie together? Because I see you're from different.
No, we're under the same umbrella.
We're the same family.
You are.
Laura. Yes. Laura's my- Yes.
Okay, all right, because I'm looking at your different titles and I'm wondering, okay. But you're not located physically in the same offices or?
We are.
You are,
Yeah.
okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when you
talk about the states,
I mean, you've got some states in here that aren't much more than 100 years old, I mean, so they was mentioned. Yeah.
Can I ask just a kind of a process question about because you reminded me, the State Historic Preservation Officer, that's a federal name, kind of in historic preservation. Just in another state, towns have more of a authority to designate historic structures and.
The greatest protection for historic resources is at the local level.
Right, and in Vermont, it's not the towns, it's I believe it's.
No, it actually still is the towns.
Is it the towns?
Most of them do not have local regulations.
So the towns are permitted to do it?
Yes.
Great, that's all I need to know, and I'll talk to you more further.
Yes,
Okay, that's actually huge, for me, anyway.
yes.
Great.
And we have grant programs if they do it, certified local governments.
Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay.
What else do you have for us?
So in section 5, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development has lines 62 and 63. For the Deli grants, right, Senator Mazza?
Yeah, yeah.
So the barn preservation grants were established in 1992. They are the oldest barn preservation grants in the country. A number of states now have them. This is a matching program. It is open to municipalities, nonprofits, and private property owners. It can be for an active agricultural building. It can be for an agricultural building that is now used as an event space. The max amount of the award is $15,000. We can see a grant anywhere from $2,000 all the way up to $15,000. It's a 2-year cycle, but these are active farms, and typically we have to allot another year. This was increased from 200,000 to 300,000 last session. So it's recommended at level funding at $300,000 for each year. And as you can see from the chart, the number of applications is from the 30s up to the 50s, and we can typically now award half. There was a point there where we were not awarding very many at all because the ask was so great. The funding was not sufficient, and because you have moved that up, thankfully, last year, we're able to award more projects. Overall, since 1982, 4.41 million has been granted to support 455 projects. And I say projects, not buildings, because some of these properties come back 2 years later for funding. And I know people that got grants 20 years ago and their buildings are still standing, they're still in active use. Very proud of this program. And it really puts money back into these properties, puts buildings back into use. These are 4 pictures. Some of them are hurting very badly. And then when they get redone, they're absolutely stunning. Really, really proud of this program. It is administered by our Caitlin Corkins, who does a great job. She goes out and works with applicants who are even thinking about it, helps them put together proposals, applications, I mean. She does the training. And because this is done by many times active farmers, we get handwritten applications. We get them faxed, we get them hand delivered, and we want to make sure that continues so that the program funding is available to them. Line 63 is the Historic Preservation Grants, which was started in 1986. This is also a matching grant. You get up to $20,000. It is for municipalities and nonprofits only. This is where some of our most prominent visual landmarks in Vermont get funding. It's a $300,000 level funded request. And here we're able to, you can see that we're providing more funding with this increase. But again, we're getting an ask that's twice what we have. The reason, like last year we got $300,000, but we're awarding 321 is because of frugal Vermonters who save money and give a little back. And so we're trying to use the oldest money first and keep things moving. And close grants out as fast as we can and just keep these properties active. Since the program started, 615 community buildings have been preserved and rehabilitated, put back into use, expanded their uses, addressed COVID problems. And that's totaling over $6 million in grant funding. This is part of the class of 23 that just got funding.
Can I just say thank you for Essex?
Yeah.
Asking for grants from everybody forever, and we're finally gonna get the water tower shored up. So thank you from my hometown.
Yes, absolutely. People constantly are asking me, what is that tower looking building? I'm like, oh, you must be talking about the water tower.
Next to the moving building, which is made of vinyl siding, right? But we'll deal with that someday, but for now, we can preserve the tower. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's what this is, perfect
Yeah.
example of what this grant is for.
Excellent.
Yeah, and again, we work with the communities. Caitlin has a great training program. She works with the Arts Council as well and BGS,
Yep.
so that our education to applicants is pretty much one and the same. We also review all the applications that come through BGS and the Arts Council as they affect historic resources.
I'll say thank you on behalf of Jericho, because I spent quite a lot of time in that community center.
Isn't that the sweetest building?
It is the sweet building, and again, because they got a grant, woo,
It makes all
you
the
know,
difference.
it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And I wish these weren't matching grants, but
It's a
it
start.
shows the community or the property owner has a buy-in as well.
It's so important.
And these grants are employing preservation contractors from Vermont.
Right, and Caitlin is great. I've done a few of these grants.
Isn't she
She's
wonderful?
wonderful.
Mhm. She's our carrot.
Because people do need hand holding. Absolutely. It's really good.
So I just want to thank you for your ongoing support of all of our programs. I'm really very proud of each and every one of them. And like Jamie said, we're trying to be very proactive, and we've taken our programs apart and looked at how best to do them, how to best plan. It's taken us a while, but I think we figured it out. We actually created his position for historic sites so that we could do it the right way. And with the grants, because of COVID, we haven't had an event for the awardees in the State House, but we're hoping to do that once the barn grants are awarded later this month. So we'll let you know.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Did you have anything?
Not in particular. I'll just mention that in the 10 years, Laura, that you've been in this position. Laura's 10 years, she's really taken not only the programs that you just heard about, the grant programs, but also the historic sites, so far beyond what she inherited, and really implemented practices that have given the state a far better chance, A, to be stewards of the resources that we own, but also just to be proactive and strategic in how we implement our grant programs. So Laura has been, I mean, just an absolute treat for the state, and continues to do incredible work for us. So,
Thank you.
and you know, it can be hard, you know, Division for Historic Preservation being the Department of Housing and Community Development, but I think that pairing actually works really well. What this team does for our tourism and just commerce in general, it's you know, it's a great pairing.
Yeah, well, we appreciate all of you. We appreciate what you do. And, you know, as you said, it's kind of when it started out, these buildings are much older than probably most of what BGS is handling. So they have a lot of needs and a lot of asks. We understand that very much so.
And we have a really great relationship with BGS, and we're developing a really great relationship with state parks. They're using some of our buildings as well down at Coolidge and Eureka. So we're expanding our partnerships and helping each other out.
Thank
Very
you.
nice.
Can I just mention, there's a couple of other documents she sent me that are on the webpage that summarize the barns.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there an end time for the grants that you just gave out, those 20,000? Do they have to use them within 12 months or something? Or
Within
is it-
2 years,
Within 2 years, okay.
but we do try to give amendments.
And they were just awarded, right, in the last couple of,
Yes.
what, months or
In
weeks?
December.
December, okay, thank you.
Well, we're gonna move on, Laura, unless there's anything else. We got some more folks to get to.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
We'll be chatting.
Yeah.
We'll let you know how we make out with discussions on the federal delegation for sure.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we do as well.
Yeah, 'cause it's a good, you were talking about. That you sent to your residents. And I was thinking about.
Howdy, how are you guys? Good to see you back here.
Like, we've been talking about this, but I don't think the average person has any clue that the state just gave her $20,000. Thanks a lot.
I'd have to decide between about 13 things.
Okay.
But definitely. Good. I saw that we should have. So our members.
Oh, yeah.
And we have
Joe. Hey, Joe.
Our manager.
You gonna join us, Joe, or you gonna sit out there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I waited for so long, I thought that's where I was.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
you out to lunch.
Never came back. Now we're all done, and we have one whole nother new section, so, yeah.
We found $1 million extra. We're trying to find where to put it.
Yeah. The monument. The answer to every question is here, the monument, the shedding and sweating and everything.
Well, welcome. Good to have you folks here, and you're in here to talk a little bit on section 3.
Yes.
Well, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Chair. I'm Terry Corson, State Court Administrator, with Greg Mosley, who's the Chief of Finance and Administration. And nice to be back here again
Glad
so
to have you
soon. A nice surprise. I wanted to just start off by mentioning it's, and this is how it appears, up in the budget line, Washington County Superior Court renovations.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention, Washington County has 2 courthouses. One is the Washington County Courthouse here on Main Street in Montpelier that covers the civil and probate divisions. This is actually the criminal and family courthouse in Barry.
Oh.
So it's called the Washington County Superior Court renovations, but just so people are aware, it's the one in Barry, that's the criminal and family courthouse. So it's probably more Washington Criminal Family Courthouse in Barry would be maybe because otherwise it might be confused with the Washington County Courthouse, which is here in Montpelier. So I just wanted to make mention of that. And Greg has the particulars about the budget, and Joe Cuddy has the particulars about, it's a BGS project in terms of all the improvements. I was just going to speak briefly in terms of, from the court perspective, a security perspective and court operations perspective. And from the security perspective, the reason why this is considered our most critical capital project, if you will, from the court perspective is the security situation. It's a criminal and family courthouse. It was built in the 1980s, but inexplicably, it does not have, for example, a sally port, which is a secure entrance for people who are in custody transported for criminal court hearings. It does not have a sally port, so people enter from a parking lot into the building, and nor is there an adequate holding cell. Normally, there's like a safe and secure place for persons while they're awaiting their hearings. Right now, people in custody come in from a parking lot, go down a hallway, that's the same hallway that the judge uses, that court staff use, that's not at all separated or segregated. And then the holding cell, instead of ideally being an individual holding cell, it's more of a group room, where you can have up to 12 people apparently. So it doesn't kind of meet any of the safety security guidelines. There was an evaluation done where we kind of failed in every aspect. So the primary need is, from a security perspective, to have a sally port, a holding cell, and a separation, so that persons in custody and the persons with them are not going down the same hall when a judge comes out of his chambers. From a court operations perspective, the other aspect of the building that is a kind of a critical situation is it has 1 criminal courtroom. And compared to the number of criminal cases per year in Barry, criminal, which is roughly 1,500 cases a year, that's accommodated by 1 criminal courtroom. By contrast, the criminal courtrooms in Costello, for example, there are 5. They have more cases, but not that many more cases.
Right.
They average about 500 cases per criminal courtroom. Same thing in Bennington, same thing in Rutland. That's kind of, so you're talking about 3 times as many cases trying to get scheduled into 1 criminal courtroom. So the other aspect from a court operations perspective is the need for a second criminal courtroom to at least try to accommodate, and even on the schedule, so many criminal cases in a day in 1 criminal courtroom. So those are the 2 major reasons why this is on the top of our priority list for improvements.
And I'm sure Greg's probably gonna go down through it, but is that what we're looking at the dollars for 26 through 29 for that expansion?
Well, and Greg can explain, right now, BGS is undertaking a study to examine, is a renovation feasible, or are we talking a complete rebuild?
Okay.
And that study is being done as we speak, and was it a month or 2 where we were, or do we know when that?
We're hoping for a month or 2 to have a final report on that, and then we can present that at the time.
And that will help determine what cost, although apparently it's not that big of a difference between complete rebuild or renovation. Apparently there's a lot of limitations on the space and the locale. But
This is a 1980s building.
yes.
Okay. 1981. Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Greg, if you're ready.
So in 1981, the energy crisis really kind of defined architecture, and that we see in this building to a great degree. It's 44,500 square feet. And it also, there's other tenants in the building as well. So there's the state's attorneys, Department of Children and Families, and probation and parole. They occupy the upper floors. The court is on the first floor and half of the second floor. And as Terry mentioned, there's no sally port. So there's usually in a criminal courthouse 3 flows of traffic. You might hear BGS come in and say front of the house, back of the house, for public and for private. You usually have locked doors for security and safety. In a criminal courthouse, you need a 3rd flow of traffic for the in custody defendants, which usually is the sally port, a holding area, which oftentimes is down in the lower level, a garage type level. And then there's a secure elevator that would bring a person up to the courtroom, so the holding cell outside the courtroom. So that's how you get the in custody defendant in and out of the courthouse without having to interact with anybody. This doesn't have that. So they come in through an employee entrance. It's pretty well known which entrance that is and what the schedule is. And so there's oftentimes there's family and friends hanging out there. There's contraband that we have to scan for along the railing and the sidewalk and in the bushes. They come into the building and they're right there in the employee corridor, which is where the judge's chamber is. And it's literally across the hall from the holding cell. And so any kind of movement through the building into a courtroom or out to a car is a risky situation. And it's one of the busier courthouses. So it's really not ideal. And we often wonder how a building that doesn't have that type of in custody infrastructure, how could that be determined to be a courthouse? The only other place where that really is a problem is in Newport. Newport courthouse is on Capitol Hill. That also is a criminal building that does not have the proper flow. That doesn't even have the front and back of the house. It has one flow. There's one staircase that wraps around a non-ADA compliant elevator. So those are our 2.
That's the brick one, though. It's really old, right? It has an excuse. It was old. This one doesn't have an excuse, right? As far as I'm concerned. Okay.
Good point.
Joe will speak to some of the mechanicals. It was built during the energy crisis, and so it doesn't have proper heating, ventilation, cooling systems in there. They expected nature to do its part. You open the windows and let the wind blow through, and everything will be fine. So there's a lot of challenges there, and that's why BGS is here. They helped us with this proposal because it's meeting 2 needs. It's meeting BGS's need to upgrade mechanicals. It's meeting our needs to do some programmatic upgrades. So it's a joint proposal. We mentioned that BGS is in the early stages of doing an assessment, and we'll find out soon whether they recommend it would be a substantial renovation or rebuild or buy new somewhere else. Given the tenants in the building, which includes the executive branch agencies, the recommendation is that, based on our needs, we would need about 80,000 square feet, which is almost twice the existing building. So it would be a substantial addition on that building, or it would be a building. You might, if you know the building down in Barry, you know that it's kind of centered funny. It's not square on the lot. So there's a lot of unused space around the building. There's got to be about 30 feet out front, and there's a parking lot up back. And so there's a lot of, on that site, there's a lot of potential if we choose to use it. It also happens to be in a floodplain. So that's a challenging piece. Parking in downtown Barry is a challenging piece. We probably remember the history there next door at Barry Place with the DCF worker. So there's a lot of complexity about this particular building. So in terms of the programmatic upgrades, I think those, security and the extra courtroom, probably, and the holding cell, the sally port, probably, that's the big piece of the increase in need. For the judiciary tenants alone. I can't speak to the other tenants in there because I don't have information on that. The safety study that Terry mentioned was done in 2015 by the National Center of State Courts. They surveyed 3 courthouses in Vermont, and Barry was one of the courthouses that they went and looked at. They gave us a whole list of recommendations. And it was the Sally Port and the flow of traffic really were the hardest ones, the biggest ones, the hardest ones to achieve. There was a feasibility study done in 2017, and that was about what would it take to just install the Sally Port, which is a major renovation, because you're now adding a garage entrance to the basement of an existing building. And so they looked at that, and I think it was about $8 to $9 million to do that, and that was 2017 dollars, right? So that's 5 years ago, and it didn't solve BGS's mechanical issues, and it didn't address any of the other tenant issues, and it didn't solve all of our issues, it just solved the entrance issue. So
How did this building fare through COVID as far as the air, the quality of air, and whether it could move air properly enough to where I'm sure this flows down like most of them, or were you able to still conduct?
So it never really closed. So
Okay.
our staff were in there all the time. The members of the public were sometimes limited. In the height of the pandemic, we limited entrance, entry into the building. But the courts really operated in a limited capacity throughout the entire pandemic.
Emergency hearings, for example, criminal arraignments, juvenile proceedings, relief from abuse, those all continued. But we were limited in terms of the capacity for people to be in the courtroom, and then we transitioned to remote hearings, which enabled us to open up and have more hearings done remotely. But we never, it might have been like 3 weeks or something. No.
Jury trials, were you still able to do jury? No jury trials.
It was a year.
Okay.
And mainly because of the isolation distances that were required and the capacity, and then in some courthouses, the HVAC situation that prevented.
That particular HVAC, we did make some adjustments and some new filters, but I believe that there haven't been any major upgrades to that HVAC. It was deemed to be, it moved enough air in a pandemic world, so
Great.
we're lucky that. And I don't know if you need to go into the data. I think Terry mentioned that on a case-by-case basis, we could probably, the data would support 3 criminal courtrooms. We have 1. And so we need at least the second courtroom in there in order to get through this backlog.
Yep. Joe, what do you have to add?
For the record, Joe Andrew with Buildings and General Services. Picking up sort of where Greg left off on that study that was done in 2017. We had hired an architectural firm to do that. And when that was done, I looked at the rest of the building because it was built in 1981. The outside walls only have 4 inches of insulation. The columns on the exterior wall used to have vermiculite in them. They're not there because of an issue that we had. We had to abate it. The windows and doors are aluminum storefront and past their 20 years. And so I looked at that and said, okay, we need to do an overhaul. The 2.5 floors are not air conditioned. So right now, what we do through the summer months is we put in window units. Some of them are actually staying there right through the winter now. And so that does not provide proper air conditioning to the inside. So as Greg said, the building sits on an angle. It's skewed to properly take into account that the people on the west side open their windows, the people on the east side open their windows, and the breeze blows through. The problem is over time, when we had open office to begin with, and then they built walls on the exterior, offices on the exterior walls. That limited that airflow. Plus, we also have the climate that's changing now. We're getting hotter, longer, hotter, and more humid summers. That in order for people to work in this tight office space, they are needing air conditioning. So I looked at a new air conditioning system to pick up the other floors. So in doing all of that, arrived roughly at the same dollar amount. I mean, another $8-9 million to renovate the rest of the building to bring it all up to date. Again, that was in 2017 when I did that. And so at that same point in time, for $16 to $18 million would be worthwhile to tear down and build new. So the study that we're doing right now is investigating that. To basically, the easiest one is to do nothing. So stay as we are. We will list all the issues that we have because we know we have issues for everybody in the building. And then the next one is really could we renovate inside the building, the existing building, to make it work? To do that, somebody, as Greg had said, the amount of square footage that they need to conduct their business appropriately, they need more space. Some, but obviously would have to vacate the building that and or an addition. So that's sort of the third item in there. The fourth is really, do we just go build someplace else? And so that's what we're looking at, and that study will give us some ideas of how much square footage we need and what that rough cost will be.
So the 1.75 that the governor's recommended, what's that gonna be? What's that for? What will that be?
That is to start our design, and whatever option comes out, we don't know what that is. We're just gambling that it's going to be one of them, and not to do nothing, obviously, but it's to do something to accommodate this, and that's what that money is for, is to start that design.
Okay. I'm gonna warn everybody as we get going on this that we have an unusual capital budget this year because we have $108 million bonded, which is pretty safe. We have a $25 million cash fund, which is where the governor's pulling this money out of. We think that's safe. And then we have some other funds of monies where we're gonna be reapportioning some monies and all of that. That's gonna give us another $34 million worth of cash, but we have $62 million worth of cash that's sitting there kind of naked. As you can imagine, we have a lot of people looking for a lot of programs down here this year. And again, I think that maybe the 25 million where this money's coming out of might be safe, but nothing's for sure on that. I don't think that, you're asking for a whole bunch of monies here when it comes down to an $8.4 billion budget, but we're going to be at the mercy of some of what these other committees are going to be pulling and clawing and going at, as Joe is probably pretty aware of already. I'm sure there's some discussions going on. So, yeah, I mean, it all makes sense to us, and we hope you make it through.
We've neglected the courthouses for a long time. For
Yeah.
Years. We've got to address them because and people want their cases heard, and they want this, and we've neglected. I've been on this committee a long time, and we got to stand up because that's our infrastructure. We're responsible. We got to have people are in there every day, and it's not going away. We're not going to make it easier. So some of these projects we got to address them. There's no better time. I hope we can continue because we got to make some advancements here because, boy, like I said, when you don't do court cases, everybody gets upset. You're backed up. And,
The public has a right to be safe, right? And if people break the law, they go to court.
You hear when they're all going through the same entrance and they're all going the same elevator and all this is not proper.
Well, and on the other side of that as well is that, the people that are coming in and have violated the laws, they have rights, and they deserve not to be seen as a criminal as they come into the building. And as of right now, that's the way they're being seen. So, yeah, so we certainly understand what you're asking for. And we also understand the, our budget is about like a Christmas turkey, ready to be carved up. We just hope we get it cooked before people start stealing portions of it. So that's about where we're at with it. But yeah, I think where the monies are coming from on this one right here, that we might be fine, but I just want to prepare you for what what we're looking at.
Terry, you tell us you're the best baker around. You bake the best.
Yeah.
Right on cue.
Since you asked.
Oh, look at this.
It's a little warm, but I don't know if you're still warm. These are just
I guess I brought the subject.
Yeah. Okay, well, can we stamp this project now?
It's a small token of appreciation for how hard you all work. I mean, I see it. It's incredible.
Thank you.
Did I say the right thing at the right time?
So my question before you gave us the cookies was, I want you to get that third courtroom. It's not acceptable to me that you would design it as 2 courtrooms when you have 3. So that would be my 2 cents was, I hope you will design the 3 that you need, because heaven knows you might need 4 by the time it's built. But
Well, thank you. I'll be sure that's taken into consideration.
this is 1 vote out of 5. though, So
Totally understand that. Everybody has all the wants. It's what we can afford.
right.
But they do have numbers too.
Yeah,
substantiate.
exactly. Exactly.
There's no calories in it anyway, right?
About as many calories as the pie you delivered to the radio station. this
Oh,
morning.
But,
Ready to make goods. I love it.
So I was just gonna mention that there are obviously other courthouses in this list. They're most of them were in the major mechanical section, moving over to BGS because they're driven primarily by mechanical issues.
yeah,
And we're working with BGS, on the impact to the courthouse and that. Our two priorities are ones that hit our safety and security, which is this courthouse, the one in Barry, and the Newport courthouse. It's unfortunate, you mentioned the cash fund that the governor has. Both those projects, Newport and Barry, are just recommended to have planning and design over the next 2 years. And so it's really not until at least the next capital bill cycle before a shovel goes in the ground.
yeah, I think there'll be some moving parts with all of that. And I really hope that everything that we have makes it through. I think we're gonna have some challenging times. I can be just upfront about that.
Well, we very much appreciate your listening and
Yeah,
your
always.
consideration.
Well, we appreciate it very much, and I think we're having a lot of pressure from Senator Mazza to get this done. Cookies, maybe. He works he works for cookies.
We're gonna schedule you again.
We're happy to come anytime.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Take this with you.
Yeah, you better.
Oh, no, that's for you all to keep
no.
it. Oh, no,
Really?
yeah, you can,
That's very nice.
Oh,
We'll auction them.
Well,
Let's get more money.
Do they have to stay all the way down there? Joe, would you like a cookie, Joe? Joe?
I'm good.
Are you sure?
Come on, Joe.
Joe?
I don't know how to top that though, so I don't want to.
Yeah, I think so, but here, yeah, you got one right here.
Come on, Joe.
No, I'm good, thank you.
You're just gonna act nice or something.
You have to go to judiciary more often, though. I didn't look on cookies.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks,
Jerry.
Good to see everybody. Great. I think just why we're just still online here. Anybody got anything to add with any of today's, what we saw?
So I think Irene raised a good point, and I'm sure BGS will do it anyway, but it seems like you've got 3 or 4 different ways you can go. You can take care of the safety thing first. That was about 7 or 8 million, as I recall.
Right.
You could take care of that and add a courtroom for whatever the next level of funding is. But it might make sense, and there's some economy of motion there to me, to look at a 3 courtroom situation with the appropriate safety there, because I do think it probably isn't gonna get any smaller.
Right.
The need for this, so I think, but I'm sure they'll do a good job with the, because they do with design and stuff, so.
Well, they handle all the cases there.
They do. They're doing charge 1,500 cases, and other courthouses have less than that.
And Senator Mazza's made a point more than once that if you do it at the right time, rather than wait a couple more years when prices will probably be higher and construction costs, labor costs, all that.
What did they say about Newport?
Well, they're designing, they want to try to buy some land right now. They're having some, yeah, they're gonna build a new one. Yeah.
They've got even more serious
I heard
security.
that, last year we heard that.
Yeah, they have the same thing we've been talking about for a while. But I wanted to raise that, so that as we get going, there's gonna be some winners, there's gonna be some losers. And I bring that up for the court because they've got a lot of maintenance coming up. They've got a lot of, you guys had a big project in Rutland they're talking about. There's in all of our districts, I think there's big projects that are coming up. And as we've already seen with the State House, where you guys took the tour and where they have the needs to clear up the air in here, that project was supposed to start this spring. The unit didn't come in, and now it's $800,000 higher than where it was. So some of these maintenance problems, they're gonna, I think it's gonna be really not up to us, but it's gonna be up to them to prioritize as, you know, listen, I want to be real here. I think, I'd love to think that we're going to be able to keep all this money. You know, I can tell you in some of the meetings I've already been in already, and so and you guys have been here for longer than I have been. You know what happens when they drop a bucket of cash onto some committees, and then as you hear about the asks that are going around and some of these programs that are going around, I think it's only fair to let some of these folks know so they can start strategically planning where they might want to be. Because I think ultimately the ask is going to, the planning is going to come down to them as far as if their pie gets cut. You know, what is most important to them. So they can go back, they can have those, and they're having those discussions. But I think it's just fair as a committee that we make it.
Now we asked Newport for some move ahead last year.
We did. Well, what happened is that Newport's situation is that they were negotiating on a piece of land,
Oh.
and they couldn't get the price right. And so they then, so they went back to you know, that discussion again. That's where they are. They still have they really are back to square one.
Where they are now, they can't tear that down.
I think they probably could. I think the grounds are big enough, but and to be fair, right where the land they're trying to buy is right next door. So yeah, I don't know. You know, maybe that's what they ought to investigate at some point in time. But so yeah, if we look at it, so when you guys look at your sheets and all that stuff, when you look at it and just to know where it is, you can see where the one-time general fund to cash fund. You know, this one right, or you can see where the CECF cash fund, that's the one that we built last year for the 25 million. Where they're looking to use like 20.9 million out of that. So that maybe that money's safe. I mean, I'm thinking that it might be safe, but you know, there's what's the word they use down here? Notwithstanding. And notwithstanding, that means they can probably go in and dig anywhere they want to dig. And so you guys are all, you're down here, you're senators, you're in other committees, you're in caucuses, you're hearing what the demands are and what people think that they want to have for programs. So
the Budget Adjustment Act will be coming up on the floor of the House tomorrow for second reading, third reading Friday.
Yeah.
And our group will get it.
And what's that? I heard that's $90 million.
91 million more than
more.
Wow, that just scares me this year. There's so big numbers of people. We're talking about childcare. Yes, we're 200 million. It starts off at the start. I don't know. Support this.
This puts 50 million additional money into BHCB.
Yeah.
They already got
9 million more into the organic farming and 20 million into keeping the hotels open.
Yeah. So, yeah.
But they haven't spent the 50 million. They've already got.
Well, that's the other side of it.
Well, yeah, and again, not to tell you guys where your jobs are and what to do, but I think in this committee, we have to really look at, I mean, Senator Mons raised a great point about Newport. A lot of these projects, how far away are you? How far away are you? How far away are you? And, you know, maybe that needs to be a little bit further away. I'm just saying that, again, they're going to make those decisions a lot about where they want to prioritize their monies, if we're able to keep them. But I think that a lot of it has to be really looked at, the maintenance part of it. It's not going to go down, and the longer you wait, there's some, talking with just an informal conversation with BGS today at lunch. There's projects out there that have weather coming into them. They have water intrusions and stuff like that, and those are the types of projects that are gonna grab some money.
There should be some land up to Newport area somewhere.
Besides the pit, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, there is. I mean, they're actually, what is it? VC? What is it?
VHCB.
VHCB is working with Rural Edge on buying a comment up there, and I'm gonna actually bring this up, but there's actually another additional 8 acres up there, right there, and maybe
all the land.
Yeah, maybe they could end up doing something up there. It's actually right in Newport. It's available lands. But, So I just thought that we'd have a little conversation about that as, as we get going about, there will be winners, there'll be losers. And as Senator Kitchell says, we all get prizes. So, yeah. Anything else?
Interesting, to me, it's an interesting contrast, right? You've got the criminal, the courthouses that are desperate for space, and then you've got the monument, and I'm just, tourists versus, like, it's
That monument's gonna be a.
It's really an interesting juxtaposition in my mind to think about, that's $10 million, right, but.
I think that monument, I think
Hopefully we'll
that,
have more than.
I think that monument, and I'm not, as I said to the folks today, I think they really need to look at a national type of funding someplace. And I don't know that if they looked as far as where they needed to look, because you ask them the questions. And they don't seem to know a lot about it, but I think.
We're gonna support that project.
Yeah, I think when we get the fellow delegation, the federal delegation in here, as Linda's working on scheduling that, looks like it might be towards the middle of February, somewhere around in there. So those are some of the questions that we might ask them as far as.
Lady before he left office.
Yeah, he did quite well.
He was passing out.
Yeah, before he left.
Yeah.
What else before we go off here?
That's it.
No, I appreciate the federal delegation, and that's really important.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah,
all
I'll
have.
be here today.
Yeah,
We
we
saw
all.
him in Senate X.
Oh, did you? Yep.
Well, yeah.
Some of their folks, yeah. I heard one senator make a personal phone call today to one of them.